I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch network. You may have missed this filing before the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in connection with the search warrant executed at Mar-a-Lago. You'll recall, of course, that the Department of Justice has recently filed an emergency motion before the 11th Circuit after Judge Aileen Cannon denied the Department of Justice's motion for partial stay as it relates to the 100 classified records. In making that holding, Judge Aileen Cannon essentially found that Donald Trump has potentially a possessory ownership interest in our nation's most highly classified documents, which absolutely makes zero legal sense. And so the Department of Justice has filed a motion for partial stay with the 11th Circuit, where they were very critical of Judge Aileen Cannon's order, who also filed a motion. Do you recall, of course, if you watch the MeidasTouch network, you will, the amicus brief or the Friends of the Court brief that some of the top former prosecutors who all worked in Republican administrations filed before Judge Aileen Cannon, trying to inform her about what the law was with respect to executive privilege and the relative rights over classified records and who has them. The punchline being not Donald Trump. Remember, Judge Aileen Cannon refused to look at the brief, that amicus brief that was submitted by those top Republican officials. Well, those top Republican officials who worked in former Republican administrations as prosecutors just filed a similar brief, but this one pointing out all of the errors made by Judge Aileen Cannon to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. So the sequence of events here is the Department of Justice filed their motion for partial stay with the 11th Circuit, where they were very critical of Judge Aileen Cannon and talked about all of the mistakes she made. That is now before the 11th Circuit. The 11th Circuit has ordered Donald Trump to respond to the Department of Justice's brief by Tuesday. And then separately, this group of former Republican prosecutors filed this amicus curiae brief, this Friends of the Court brief is what that translates to, where they're submitting it and saying, look, we have incredible institutional knowledge of how the executive branch operates based on our roles as former federal prosecutors. Let us explain again all of the way Judge Aileen Cannon got it wrong. And this list is like a who's who of top federal prosecutors, by the way, who were in Republican administrations. We're talking about Donald B. Ayer, John Bellinger, Gregory Brower, John Farmer, William Weld, Christine Todd Whitman, people who were former prosecutors, people like Christine Todd Whitman who were governors, Republican governors, all explaining to the 11th Circuit how Judge Aileen Cannon got it wrong. And just want to focus on some of the key arguments that are being made here in this brief. The first argument is that Judge Aileen Cannon was completely wrong in holding that Trump could, under any circumstances, prevail as to the 100 classified documents at issue. Those documents are the exclusive property of the United States government. According to this amicus brief that was filed, Trump has no right to possess the 100 or so classified records at issue here because no private citizen has a possessory interest in the U.S. government's classified records. And the brief says, this proposition is not controversial. Even former President Trump's own brief opposing the government's request for a stay did not argue he has a possessory interest in the classified documents. Second, this brief argues that the appointment of a special master was clearly improper to the extent it requires the special master to make decisions about executive privilege. Executive privilege, the brief explains, cannot be asserted as former President Trump proposed against the executive branch itself. And that is particularly true in this matter, the brief notes, where the executive branch has sought the return of its own classified records that belong to the U.S. government in connection with its ongoing core executive and national security functions. And the appointment of a special master was legal error, and most egregiously regarding those 100 classified documents. Executive privilege, according to the brief, is based on the need for confidentiality in communications and deliberations with the president in the exercise of executive function. So it would be especially bizarre perversion of the privilege to allow a former president to use it to thwart a core executive function like a criminal investigation into mishandling of classified information. And third and finally, what the brief argues is that the district court, Judge Aileen Cannon, gave greater weight to the reputation of Trump than to the reputation of any other citizen, and greater weight to that personal reputation than to our national security concerns, which is fundamentally inconsistent with U.S. law. And as the brief explains, you can't give anyone in the United States of America, in our democracy, you can't endow anyone with greater rights than anyone else as a private citizen. That says effectively endowing President Trump with greater procedural rights than those afforded to other citizens violates fundamental principles in our legal system. And the court and the brief goes on to cite for the court a case, United States versus Lee from 1882, that says the following: all the officers of the government, from the highest to the lowest, are creatures of the law and are bound to obey it. And you'll recall that in Judge Aileen Cannon's order, she found extraordinary circumstances because of who Donald Trump is. There's also a conflict there, obviously, in the sense that Judge Aileen Cannon was appointed by Trump. We know now, though, that Judge Aileen Cannon is unfortunately completely corrupt, and her legal analysis is just, how can I serve Trump? But the very idea in her notion, as she analyzed the elements to assert extraordinary jurisdiction, which she shouldn't have, was that she held Trump on a higher pedestal than everyone else in this country, and said that his reputational interests are so important that they supersede our national security interests. Think about how dangerous of a proposition that is. And this brief right here, submitted by these top Republican, top prosecutors and top officials in former Republican administrations, points that out. I want to give a special shout out to one of the groups behind it, Democracy 21, which is doing incredible work fighting for a democracy and democratic institutions. You can learn more about that group and see if there's any ways you can help out at Democracy 21, the number 21, democracy21.org. They were very instrumental in getting that amicus brief filed. Now it's up to the 11th Circuit if they want to read that brief. Judge Aileen Cannon rejected even reading the brief. She blinded her eyes to the law and said, I don't even want to know what the law is, from former top Republican prosecutors. That just tells you a lot about who Judge Aileen Cannon is. But my instinct is the 11th Circuit is going to read it. It's a relatively short brief. I mean, that's the crazy thing about Judge Aileen Cannon not reading it. I mean, the brief is literally 24 pages long. It'd take you about a half hour to read it. Would think when national security is on the line and like our nuclear secrets, maybe you can spend a half hour as a judge to read the brief of like a former governor and other top officials who are trying to educate you on what the law is. I think this is going to be persuasive to the 11th Circuit, and I've predicted this already. I don't think the 11th Circuit is going to go along with Judge Aileen Cannon's order. I have to preface it to say the 11th Circuit does have a lot of right-wingers on it, has a lot of Trump appointees on it, but the 11th Circuit, there's been a lot of other issues where the 11th Circuit has been confronted with, really radical and extreme things that DeSantis has done that has violated the law where they haven't stood for it. And here, fundamentally, Trump has not claimed that he owns those records. He has not claimed a possessory interest. He's not asserted executive privilege over those records. To do so, he'd essentially also be admitting the crime that he stole them, which he's essentially done anyway, but he hasn't admitted that those documents even belong to him. Instead, his argument is, don't trust the government. Like, they're telling you that these are classified records. They have affidavits that say it. They have the top counterintelligence official at the DOJ giving sworn declarations saying those are top classified records. But I'm not going to even say that, Judge. I'm not going to do an affidavit. I'm not even going to say what I know is there or not there. I'm just going to say, hey, the government's lying, Judge, and my reputation may be hurt. So just trust me. And Judge Aileen Cannon was like, yeah, I trust this guy. I trust him. What? And the 11th Circuit is going to be, there's a panel of judges who are going to be seeing this. And I can't see them saying, wow, that's an accurate argument. It would fundamentally disrupt their entire institution as the 11th Circuit if they were to go along with the charade. But we will keep you updated. But that's the update here with this this brief that was filed. Again, a Friends of the Court brief. They're not parties to the case. Any group can submit it. You could submit an amicus brief if you wanted to the 11th Circuit. Doesn't mean they're going to read it. You could submit a brief in any one of these cases. You could write a letter to a judge and call it an amicus brief and submit it to a judge. But a group like this that has this level of firepower, former Republican prosecutors or former prosecutors in Republican administrations and top Republican officials will go a very, very, very long way. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Hit the subscribe button right now. We are on our way to 1 million subs this year, thanks to you. Also, check out patreon.com/MeidasTouch. I get the questions from you all the time. How could we help out grow this independent media platform? That is how. Go to patreon.com/MeidasTouch and click on one of the memberships that you think best suits how you want to be involved. There's special perks, special benefits, but most importantly, we can grow this thing together. I'm Ben Meiselas. Until next time.
MeidasTouch is unapologetically pro-democracy, and look, we know you are too. So please make sure you check out our best-selling shirt and our best-selling gear, the unapologetically pro-democracy gear. And hey, while you're at it, make sure you check out my favorite shirt and one of our most famous designs. It wasn't rigged, you're just a loser. At store.meidastouch.com. That's store.meidastouch.com.